Today, we're looking at one of the most controversial practices in MMA, weight cutting. We've seen it all before. Fighters sweating it out in plastics in a sauna suit, running on treadmills till they're dead, and starving themselves for days and weeks on end just to get down to weight. They don't do it to lose 5 pounds. They do it to lose 10, 20, even more to make weight in some of these weight classes, to hit the lowest weight class their body will allow. But why do fighters do it? And why do most promotions not even try and stop this practice? Let's break it down. First off, what is weight cutting? Simply put, it's when a fighter reduces their body weight to compete in a smaller division. The actual loss of weight can be done through a variety of different measures. Usually in the beginning, it's just good old cardio and good diet. This transitions into more dangerous methods as we go. Dehydrating via reduced water intake, fasting for far more than what is healthy, and in some cases using laxatives, which are, in many cases, banned. For most athletes, though, the months leading up to the event will be spent cutting weight and cutting calories. But at this point, water weight should not be being cut. And if it is, that's even more incredibly dangerous. So at this point, no water weight is being lost that isn't immediately being taken back in for the fighter. But these fighters, who are already sometimes in very good shape, will be eating at a caloric deficit for weeks and sometimes months on end to make weight for these fights. This will sometimes lead to fat burning at a rapidly unhealthy rate. This is the reason why many MMA fighters blow up between camps and between fights. Fighters like Paddy Pimblett have gone on to detail their extreme weight gains and weight losses between fights and camps. Paddy, for example, will go from 155 to 200 pounds in rapid succession. In the weeks following his fights, he'll gain nearly 40 pounds of body weight.
What do you reckon you weigh right now?
About 200.
Unlike simple diet management, the extreme kinds of fasting these fighters go on to do are about limiting the food to extremely small amounts, maybe one meal a day and some snacks, while still training at the full capacity. For healthier fighters, that process usually only begins during fight week, but even if it's just the last week before their fight, it's still not a good thing. The final stage of weight cutting is excess water removal. This can take many forms. The main one that most people and most fighters are accustomed to, sweating. Fighters will sit in salt baths, they will jog in heavy clothing or plastics, anything to force the body to overheat to extreme amounts and then cool itself down with what little water is left in the body. This is extremely unhealthy. It can destroy the kidneys. Cutting weight like this has been proven to be incredibly dangerous. If the low sodium consumption and sweating doesn't do it all by itself,
Sitting these before for hours. Haven't I had hours when I've been sitting here contemplating killing myself, where it's that bad. Where you're sitting there thinking, oh, do I even want to fight? Do I seriously want to do this to myself?
fighters want every advantage they can get, and they have good reason to think this way. Having a size and strength advantage over your opponent can be huge in a close fight. It can be the difference between winning a split decision and getting cut by the UFC. It can be the difference between getting your win bonus and not being able to feed your family. The size and strength advantage that they could have after cutting a lot of weight could close the gap in a tight fight and give them a win over someone they may not have been able to defeat otherwise. With pay so low and bonuses in many ways being one of the only ways that fighters are able to pay their bills, you understand why they'll do just about anything, even pushing towards death's door to make weight. Fighters take every chance they can get to put extra food on the table for their families. And with the incredible disparity in pay between executives and fighters, can you really blame them? Here's the thing. For all the advantages that weight cutting offers fighters, it's still terribly dangerous and has huge disadvantages. Not only can weight cutting destroy fighters' kidneys, there's reasonable amounts of evidence that it's easier to get concussed and knocked out in these states of dehydration fighters put themselves in. This is due to the fluid around the brain being reduced due to weight cutting. The fluid inside the brain is largely what protects your head when it's shaking around. On top of that, there's a huge monetary loss for fighters if they miss weight. In many cases, it can be upwards of 30% of a fight purse going to your opponent or the commission if a fighter misses weight by any amount more than a pound. In many cases, missing weight forfeits any potential bonuses a fighter might win. And on top of that, promoters may not want to give these fighters opportunities, even if they miss by a pound or two. Since fighters have every reason in the world to keep looking for advantages, they're not going to stop on their own. So they will have to be discouraged from a regulatory point. No matter what solution you go with, there's going to be trade-offs. And what we're proposing here is a solution that more favorably leads to healthier outcomes for fighters. The trade-off, potentially, is more fights will be canceled. But that's something we have to consider that might be worth the risk. Fighter safety, fighter health, potential fight cancellations going up. So let's get into it. One main solution is we have fighters weigh in about 2 months before their fights, because most fights are made more than 2 months in advance. And each week following that initial weigh-in, they have to weigh in again, and they have to stay within a couple percent of that original weight. So the fighters will have two options: dangerously cut weight for 6, 8, 10 weeks consecutively, which is not sustainable. They will die. There's no way a fighter could do that. Or they fight at their natural weight, a healthy, fit shape, not a ballooned up weight as we discussed earlier, but a healthy, fit fight shape that they can make consecutively over camp. So the only way they make weight is if they're fighting at a natural fit weight. The logistics of this can be quite difficult though. For larger promotions like Bellator, Ryzen, ONE, the UFC, you will need to send out scales calibrated that are tamper-proof, if you will, to the entire roster, if not all the camps. There will have to be a system in place that checks on all of this and verifies the fighters aren't lying or tampering with the weights or doing something to get an edge over this system. But if done remotely well, this should promote a much healthier system, because if they're not lying and they're not able to cheat, they will have to fight at a healthy weight class where they are not losing water weight in any excessive amount. One championship has a solution that has its flaws, but it may be the best solution we currently have, especially relative to all competitors. Notably, it focuses almost exclusively on hydration tests the week of the fight. One championship vice president, Rich Franklin, also the former UFC middleweight champion, spoke on their system. We don't use the term weight cutting because there is no weight cutting. We've developed a system of how we want our athletes to weigh in. The only way we can ensure they'll actually compete at the weight they walk around at is by hydration testing. We use an instrument to test the specific gravity of their urine, which tests how much solids are in their urine. Obviously, the more solids you have, the more dehydrated you are, he told MMA Mania. That method removes a lot of legwork for commissions, for promotions, and for fighters, but it only really holds the fighters to a microscope the week of the event. Something that keeps a closer eye on the fighters throughout camp for a longer duration of time is probably the best solution. Something similar to the system we discussed earlier on weighing in for several weeks at a time. A solution we can implement now, and the system that currently exists, is to force all short notice fights to move up one weight class. Now, how we designate what is short, it's subjective, but I would argue it should be anything under 6 weeks. If you followed the sport for any significant amount of time, you've seen a lot of short notice fighters miss weight, and then Dana White or whichever promoter goes on to berate them for missing weight. And they'll say things like, "You signed the contract, you had a duty, you said you could do it." Of course, most of these fighters are broke. They'll take any opportunity they can get to either get to the big show or take a bigger fight. And they'll try their damnedest to make that weight. And if they fail, they're punished more than if they just turned down the fight originally. It is an absolute lose-lose situation for them in these cases, and it's incredibly dangerous. The situation that the promoters put these fighters in is irresponsible, ethically unhinged, and arguably could be liable for medical issues these fighters experience later in life. One thing most of us can agree on is that weight cutting is bad and needs to go. Weight cutting is merely a symptom of a flawed and broken system, and we have ways to solve it. Weight cutting as it is going to lead to a fighter dying, and the blood of these fighters will be on the hands of promoters and commissions for not making changes that could have protected them easily and barely harmed any of their bottom lines. But we have to be proactive. We have to call for these things because we know that fighters do not act in their best interests and they do not act collectively for some reason. We have another video we're working on just about this, about unions and collective bargaining for fighters and why they are so apprehensive. Let us know what solutions you think would work for weight cutting. What systems do you think we could implement to save fighters' lives and make this sport safer for everyone involved?